The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the threadbare wool of her tunic, a predator seeking the last vestiges of her warmth. Alara's fingers were numb, her knuckles raw and split from the lye soap and the icy water in the bucket. She scrubbed the flagstones of the great hall, her movements mechanical, her world reduced to the scrape of bristles on stone and the gnawing ache in her belly. They called her the ghost, the shadow, the nothing omega. She was an orphan from a shamed line, a wolfless stray taken in by the Blackwood pack out of a cruel sort of pity that had long since curdled into contempt. Here she was less than a servant. She was a reminder of failure, a stain on their pride. Her own pack had cast her out when, on her 18th turning, her wolf had not come. The connection, the inner fire that defined their people, was absent in her. She was a hollow shell, a mistake. So she scrubbed floors. She hauled water. She mended clothes she would never wear and cooked food she would never taste, save for the scraps left for the hounds. And she endured. A sharp kick connected with her ribs, sending a jolt of white-hot pain through her side. She gasped, the sound swallowed by the cavernous hall. "Still alive, little rat?" Lyra's voice was like honey laced with poison. She was the Alpha's daughter, beautiful and cruel, her silver blonde hair a stark contrast to Alara's own mousy brown. Two of her friends flanked her, their faces masks of sneering amusement. Alara curled in on herself, trying to make her body a smaller target. She didn't look up. Looking up was a challenge. A challenge was an invitation for more pain. "I asked you a question, filth." Lyra's boot nudged her again, harder this time. "Yes," Alara whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Lyra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Pity. I was hoping the frost had claimed you last night. It would have saved us the trouble of looking at your pathetic face." She gestured to the bucket. "You missed a spot." With a flick of her ankle, Lyra kicked the bucket over. Filthy, freezing water sloshed across the floor Alara had just finished, soaking the hem of her tunic and turning the chill in her bones to a deep, agonizing freeze. "Do it again," Lyra commanded, her voice bored. "And do it right this time." They swept out of the hall, their laughter echoing off the cold stone. For a long moment, Alara didn't move. She lay in the puddle of icy water, the pain in her ribs a dull throb against the sharp, biting cold. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She refused to let them fall. Crying was a luxury. It was an admission of defeat. She would not be defeated. Not by them. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself up. Every muscle screamed in protest. Her hands, clumsy and numb, reached for the fallen bucket. She would do it again. She would scrub the floor until it shone. She would endure this day, just as she had endured all the others. It was all she knew how to do. Survive. But as she knelt in the freezing water, a different kind of cold entered the hall. It was not the chill of the stone or the winter air. It was a primal cold, a dread that slithered down her spine. The wind outside began to howl, not a normal winter gale, but a shriek that sounded like a hungry beast. The great wooden doors of the hall shuddered in their iron frames. Alpha Valerius, Lyra's father, strode into the hall, his face a thundercloud. He was a brute of a man, all muscle and snarling authority. His gaze swept the room and landed on Alara, a speck of misery on his pristine floor. "You!" he barked. His voice was a whip crack. Alara flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done something wrong. She was always doing something wrong. The woodsheds are nearly empty, and this storm is a demon. The northern forest border has fallen pine. Go! Fetch wood until the bins are full. A death sentence. She knew it. Everyone knew it. The northern forest was forbidden, a place of shadow and things older than their pack. To be sent there, in a blizzard that was growing stronger by the minute, was not a task. It was an execution. A way to get rid of the pack's worthless burden without having to bloody their own hands. But, Alpha, she began, the words catching in her throat. It was the first time she had ever dared to question an order. His eyes narrowed to slits. Did you speak, Omega? The word was a slap. She bowed her head, the fight draining out of her as quickly as it had come. No, Alpha. Go, now. She scrambled to her feet, not daring to look at him, and fled the hall. She grabbed the thinnest, most tattered cloak from the servant's peg by the kitchens and a length of rough rope. She didn't allow herself to think. Thinking would lead to terror, and terror would freeze her where she stood. The moment she stepped outside, the wind sliced at her like 1,000 tiny claws. Snow, thick and wet, blinded her instantly. It was a wall of white, a roaring, churning chaos. The path to the forest edge was already disappearing. She pulled the flimsy hood over her head and leaned into the gale, each step a monumental effort. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath and burning her lungs. This was it. This was how she would die. Alone in the snow, an insignificant life extinguished without a whisper. A strange, hollow peace settled in her chest. Perhaps Lyra was right. Perhaps it was for the best. The edge of the forest was a line of skeletal trees clawing at a gray sky. The roar of the wind was slightly muffled here, but the snow fell thicker, piling in deep drifts. She gathered fallen branches, her frozen fingers fumbling with the wood. She tied a small, pathetic bundle together with the rope. It was not enough. It would never be enough to fill the bins, but it was a start. She turned to head back, but the world was gone. There was no hall, no path, only a swirling vortex of white. Disorientation hit her like a physical blow. Which way had she come? She took a step, then another, her feet sinking deep into the snow. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pierce through her resignation. She was lost. She stumbled onward, directionless, the small bundle of wood still clutched in her arms. It was useless, but it was all she had. The cold was becoming insidious now, a creeping numbness that promised sleep. Her body was failing. Her eyelids felt heavy as stones. Just a little rest, a voice whispered in her mind. Just lie down for a moment. She tripped over something hidden beneath the snow, sprawling forward. Her face plunged into a deep drift, the shock of the cold a brutal awakening. She lay there, gasping, the snow melting on her hot cheeks. She should stay here. It would be so easy to close her eyes. But then she heard it, a sound beneath the howl of the wind, a low, guttural growl of pain. It was followed by the wet, tearing sound of flesh. Curiosity, or perhaps some last defiant spark of life, made her push herself up. She crawled forward, peering through the curtain of falling snow. The scene before her stole the air from her lungs. 3 monstrous creatures, all shadow and teeth and twisted limbs, lay dead in a clearing. Their black blood steamed against the pure white of the snow, and in the center of the carnage stood a wolf. It was a creature from a legend, massive, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its fur the color of a moonless midnight. But it was wounded. A deep, vicious gash ran along its flank, pouring blood onto the snow, a shocking splash of crimson against the black and white. It swayed on its feet, its powerful form trembling with exhaustion and pain. Another shadow beast, one she hadn't seen, lunged from behind a snow-laden pine. It was all claws and gaping maw, a thing of nightmare. The great wolf met the charge, but it was too slow. They tumbled together in a flurry of black fur and shadowy limbs. The wolf was strong, its jaws powerful, but it was fading. Alara could see it. Without thinking, without reason, she acted. The bundle of firewood was still in her hand. She scrambled closer, her fear a distant, ringing noise. The shadow creature was on top of the wolf, its claws digging deep. With a scream that was torn from her throat by the wind, Alara swung the bundle of wood. She put all of her weight, all of her desperation into the blow. The frozen branches connected with the side of the shadow creature's head with a sickening crack. It was like hitting a stone wall, but it was enough. The creature reeled, turning its horrifying, multi-eyed face towards her. It hissed, a sound of pure malice, and lunged. She fell backward, scrambling away, her hands sinking into the snow. This was it. A stupid, pointless death. But the great wolf was on its feet. With a final, desperate surge of strength, it seized the shadow creature by the neck and with a terrible wrench snapped its spine. The creature went limp, dissolving into a pool of oily black smoke that the wind quickly tore to shreds. Silence descended, broken only by the keening wind and the wolf's ragged, wet breathing. It turned its head, and its eyes met hers. They were not the eyes of a beast. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a pain that mirrored her own. And they glowed with a soft, impossible light, like molten gold. The wolf took a shaky step towards her, then another. Its massive body collapsed. It fell onto its side in the snow, the blood from its wound pooling beneath it. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound of utter defeat. Alara stared, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He had saved her. This magnificent, impossible creature had saved her from the monster. And now he was dying. The cold, the fear, her own impending death, it all fell away. All she saw was this beautiful, powerful being bleeding its life into the snow. She couldn't let it die. She couldn't bear to watch another living thing suffer and perish alone. She crawled towards him, her limbs clumsy with cold. The scent of pine and blood and something else, something like a winter storm and distant stars, filled her senses. He watched her approach, his golden eyes never leaving her face. There was no threat in them, only a weary sort of question. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's okay." She reached his side, her knees sinking into the blood-soaked snow. The gash in his flank was horrifying, deep and ragged. He needed pressure. He needed warmth. He needed a miracle. She had none of those things to give. All she had were her own 2 hands, frozen and useless, and a desperate, foolish hope. She tore a strip from the bottom of her already ruined tunic. The fabric was stiff with ice. She pressed the makeshift bandage against the wound. The moment her skin made contact with his fur, the world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A flash of searing, incandescent heat shot up her arm, straight into her heart. A bolt of lightning, white and gold, seemed to arc between her hand and his body. She cried out, a sharp gasp of shock and pain. The world went white. Not the white of the snow, but a pure, blinding light that consumed everything. She felt a burning sensation on the back of her hand, an intense, focused agony, as if she were being branded with a hot iron. In the center of the light, she felt him. Not just the wolf, but a mind, a consciousness vast and ancient, a presence like a mountain. It crashed into her own, a tidal wave of loneliness, of duty, of pain, and of a sudden, shattering recognition. You. The word was not spoken. It was a thought, a feeling, a truth that slammed into the core of her being. The light receded as quickly as it had come, leaving spots dancing in her vision. She was kneeling in the snow, her hand still pressed against the wolf's side, but it was no longer a wolf. Lying in the snow before her was a man. He was colossal, his shoulders broad enough to blot out the sky. His bare skin steamed in the frigid air, corded with the muscles of a predator. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, dusted with snow. He was harsh, beautiful, and terrifying, and his eyes, the same molten gold, were fixed on her. Alara snatched her hand back as if burned. She stared at it, trembling. There, on the back of her hand, was a mark. It glowed with a soft, silvery light, an intricate swirling pattern like a frost flower and a spiral galaxy combined. It was beautiful, impossible, and it pulsed with a faint warmth that spread through her frozen fingers. What was happening? What was this? The man pushed himself up onto one elbow. The horrific gash on his side was gone. In its place, the skin was smooth and unblemished, save for a faint, fading golden shimmer. He looked from his healed side to the glowing mark on her hand, and then to her face. A look of profound, heart-stopping awe crossed his features. The loneliness she had felt in him was washed away by a tide of something else, something fierce and protective and utterly overwhelming. "You're her," he breathed, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the snow, through her very bones. It was not a question. It was a statement of absolute, world-altering fact. Fear, stark and primal, finally broke through her shock. This was magic. Dark magic. She had seen him shift. She had done something to him. The elders always warned of such things. She was a curse, an abomination. She scrambled backward, trying to get away, but her frozen limbs wouldn't obey. She was weak, dizzy, the world tilting on its axis. He reached for her. His hand was huge, his fingers long and calloused. She flinched, expecting a blow. But his touch was impossibly gentle as his fingers brushed against her cheek. The contact was another jolt, but this time it was not pain. It was warmth. A deep, resonant warmth that flowed from him into her, chasing the life-threatening chill from her body. It felt like the first ray of sun after a long winter. It felt like home. "No," she whimpered, the word a denial of everything her body, her soul, was suddenly screaming at her. This couldn't be real. It was a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by the cold. "I have you," he said, his voice soft, yet holding the unshakable certainty of a mountain. "I've been waiting." Who was he? What did he mean? Her mind was a whirlwind of terrified questions. She was nobody, nothing. She was Alara the ghost, the Omega who scrubbed floors. She was not someone anyone waited for. His golden eyes softened, seeing the panic in her face. He shifted, moving with a fluid grace that belied his size, and knelt before her. He was still wearing nothing but the snow, yet he seemed to feel no cold. He reached for the thin cloak she wore, pulling the hood more securely over her head, his knuckles brushing her frozen jaw. "You are cold," he stated simply. "We need to go." "Go where?" she whispered. I have to get the wood back. The words sounded absurd even as she said them. A flicker of something dangerous crossed his face. A low growl rumbled in his chest. The ones who sent you into this storm to die will answer for it. But not now. Now, I am taking you home. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The shock of being held, of being lifted, was so foreign that she couldn't even struggle. She was enveloped in his heat, the scent of him, pine and storm, a dizzying, intoxicating cloud. Her head fell against his broad, bare shoulder. The world was spinning. The glowing mark on her hand pulsed in time with the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She could feel him, a solid, warm presence not just in her arms, but in her mind. The bond, raw and new, was a humming wire connecting their souls. Her instincts, the wolfless instincts she had always been told were broken, were screaming a single, terrifying word at her. Mate. The thought was so alien, so impossible that she nearly blacked out. She? Mated? To this? This king of winter and shadow? It was a madness, a cruel joke. She was worthless, invisible. But the gentle strength of his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her ear, the undeniable warmth spreading from the mark on her hand, they told a different story. They spoke of a destiny she could not comprehend, a future that was suddenly, terrifyingly, not empty. As he carried her through the blizzard, his steps sure and certain where she had been hopelessly lost, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. It was a tiny, fragile spark in the vast, cold emptiness of her existence. Hope. And it terrified her more than anything else. From the edge of the trees, hidden behind a snow-dusted fir, two figures watched them go. Lyra, her face pale with a mixture of fury and disbelief, and the pack's lead hunter, a hulking brute named Fendrel. "Did you see that?" Lyra hissed, her voice trembling. "The light? The mark on her hand?" Fendrel's eyes were wide. He had seen the man shift. He recognized the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from him even at this distance. "That was no common rogue," he breathed. That was a king." There was an awe in his voice that sickened Lyra. "He took her," Lyra spat, the words venomous. "That filth. He took her." Jealousy, sharp and acidic, burned in her gut. She had been the one destined for a great match, for power, not the Omega rat, not the nothing girl. "What was that mark?" Fendrel asked, his gaze distant. He had heard the old tales, the legends of the first wolves, of the soul bonds that were the foundations of the great lines. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her sharp mind putting the pieces together. The king, the light, the sudden healing, the claiming mark. It was a mate bond. A fated mate bond. The worthless Omega was the fated mate of an alpha king. The absurdity of it was laughable. The injustice of it was a fire in her soul. "My father must know," she said, her voice cold and hard. "Immediately." She turned and ran, Fendrel at her heels. She did not see this as a miracle. She saw it as a theft. The Omega had stolen a destiny that should have been hers. And she saw something else, too. An opportunity. A king's mate was a king's weakness, and Alpha Valerius was a master at exploiting weakness. Alara woke slowly, adrift in a sea of warmth and softness. For a moment she thought she had died, and this was some strange afterlife. The air smelled of wood smoke and cedar, and she was cocooned in furs so thick and soft she felt she might drown in them. She was in a bed, a real bed, not the lump of straw in a cold corner of the kitchens, but a vast, carved wooden frame with a mattress that yielded to her body. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone hearth across the room, casting dancing shadows on the timber walls. Panic shot through her. Where was she? She sat up, the heavy furs pooling around her waist. She was wearing a simple linen shift, clean and soft against her skin. Her own wretched tunic was gone. Her body felt good. The ache in her ribs was gone. The cuts on her hands were healed. She felt rested, nourished, for the first time in memory. Then she saw her hand. The silver, swirling mark was still there, no longer glowing brightly, but etched into her skin like a delicate, luminous tattoo. It was real. All of it. The man, the wolf, the bond. You are awake. The deep voice came from a chair near the fire. He stood, and the sheer size of him once again stole her breath. He was dressed now, in simple black trousers and a dark tunic that did nothing to hide the powerful lines of his body. His molten gold eyes were fixed on her, their intensity of physical force. She pulled the furs up to her chin, a useless gesture of defense. "Who are you?" she whispered. "My name is Kale," he said, his voice softer now. He took a step closer. "I am the Alpha of these lands, the King of the North." An Alpha King, a legend, a figure from stories told to frighten children. She was in the den of the greatest predator in the world. Her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. What do you want with me?" A shadow of pain crossed his face, so deep and ancient it made her ache to see it. "Want with you?" he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "I have waited 500 years for you." 500 years. The number was incomprehensible. Her mind reeled. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "This is a mistake. I'm nobody. I'm an Omega. I don't even have a wolf." The words tumbled out, the litany of her worthlessness that had been drilled into her since childhood. "You are not nothing," he said, and the conviction in his voice was absolute. He came to the side of the bed and knelt, so his eyes were level with hers. "You are the other half of my soul. The legends call you the Anam Cara, the soul friend, my mate." He reached out, not to her, but to the glowing mark on her hand. He traced the silver lines with his thumb, his touch sending a cascade of warmth through her veins. "This mark," he said, his voice reverent, "is a sign of the oldest magic, the bond of creation. It chose you. It chose me. It has made us one." She stared at him, at his predatorily beautiful face, at the raw emotion in his golden eyes. It was too much, too fast. Her entire life had been pain and servitude and invisibility. To be told she was the fated mate of a king, it felt like a lie. A beautiful, terrible lie, designed to break her more completely than any beating ever could. "No," she whispered, pulling her hand away. "You're wrong. It has to be a mistake." His eyes darkened with a hurt that was so profound it was like a physical wound. "There is no mistake," he said, his voice flat. "I have felt the hollowness of our severed bond every day for centuries. And for the first time, when you touched me, I felt whole." He stood, turning away from her to stare into the fire. "The pack that abused you, that cast you out into the storm, they will be punished. I will raze their stronghold to the ground. The casual, absolute certainty of his threat terrified her. "No, please," she begged, scrambling to the edge of the bed. "They are cruel, but you can't just—" He turned back to her, his face a mask of cold fury. "They laid hands on what is mine. They tried to extinguish the light of my soul. For that, there is no forgiveness." Mine. The word echoed in the space between them, possessive and final. Part of her, the deep, instinctual part that had been dormant her whole life, thrilled to the sound of it. It felt like a shield, a promise. The rational part of her, the part that had learned to survive by being small and unnoticed, was petrified. "Sit down," he said, his voice softening again as he saw the fear on her face. It was not a harsh command, but a gentle, firm instruction. "You are safe here. No one will ever harm you again. I swear it on my life." He left the room, closing the heavy door softly behind him, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the impossible truth branded on her skin. She looked around the room at its rustic warmth, the furs, the fire. It was a haven, a gilded cage. Was this her new life? To be the treasured possession of a terrifyingly powerful king. It was better than freezing to death. It was better than being beaten by Lyra. So why did she feel so utterly, hopelessly lost? Days bled into a strange, dreamlike week. Kale was a constant, powerful presence. He brought her food with his own hands, sat with her by the fire, telling her stories of the north, of his people, the great wolves who guarded the mountain passes. He never pushed, never demanded anything of her, but his possessive gaze was a constant weight. He watched her as if she were a priceless treasure he was terrified of losing. He called her his queen. The word felt foreign on her tongue, a costume she was not worthy to wear. But slowly, tentatively, the terror began to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of wonder. She began to feel the bond between them not as a chain, but as a current of warmth and strength. When he was near, the mark on her hand was warm. When he was away, dealing with the duties of his kingdom, it grew cool, and a strange, hollow ache would settle in her chest. She was changing. The hollow shell she had been was starting to fill with something new. With his unwavering belief in her, she started to wonder if she could, perhaps, be more than nothing. But the world outside Kale's mountain sanctuary had not forgotten her. Alpha Valerius had been incandescent with rage when Lyra told him what she had seen, but his rage quickly cooled into cunning. The Omega whelp, the worthless stray, had stumbled into the greatest prize imaginable. She was the Alpha King's fated mate, his one vulnerability. He sent a rider under a flag of truce, not to Kale's fortress, but to the shadowed lands far to the east. The rider carried a message for another king, a ruler of a different sort, a king of whispers and dark bargains. Morven, the Shadow King, leader of the Ember Covenant. The message was simple. I have the key to your ascension. The Alpha King's mate is within our grasp. Together, we can bring him to his knees. The reply was swift. A plan was forged. A plan that hinged on capturing a single, unsuspecting girl. Kale had to leave. A dispute between two of his vassal alphas on the western border required his presence. It was a 3-day journey. He was loath to go. I do not like leaving you, he said, his hand tracing the mark on hers. The bond had grown stronger, a silent conversation always flowing between them. She could feel his reluctance, his anxiety. I will be fine, she said, and for the first time, the words felt almost true. She was in the heart of his kingdom, surrounded by his elite royal guard. She was safer here than she had ever been in her life. Go. Your people need you. He pulled her to him, his arms a cage of steel and warmth. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent. 3 days, he murmured against her skin. Do not leave the citadel. Stay where my guard can see you. I will, she promised. He kissed her then, a soft, chaste kiss on her forehead that still sent a jolt of fire through her entire body. When I return, he said, his golden eyes intense, we will make it official. I will present you to the Pax, my queen. Then he was gone, a whirlwind of power and authority, leaving a kale-shaped void in the room. The mark on her hand immediately felt cooler. The ache in her chest returned, a dull loneliness she was starting to recognize as his absence. For 2 days, she followed his instructions. She stayed within the warm, timbered walls of the citadel, watched over by silent, hulking guards whose amber eyes missed nothing. She read by the fire, explored the vast library, and tried to reconcile the girl who scrubbed floors with the woman a king called his queen. On the 3rd day, a frantic message arrived. An avalanche had blocked the western pass. Cale was delayed. He would be 2 more days at least. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. It was foolish. She was safe. But the bond felt stretched thin, a faint thrumming wire over a vast distance. That night, the attack came. It was not an open assault. It was silent, insidious. Shadows seemed to peel away from the corners of the citadel. Guards fell with choked gasps, dark-fletched arrows sprouting from their throats. They were Valerius's hunters, masters of stealth, but with them were others. Figures cloaked in black, whose movements were unnaturally fast, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. The Ember Covenant. Alara was in her rooms, staring into the fire, her hand resting over the mark, trying to draw comfort from its faint warmth. The door burst open. It was not Cale. Valerius stood there, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. Behind him were 2 of the red-eyed shadow warriors. The little rat, Valerius sneered. Look at you, dressed up like a lady. You almost had me fooled. Fear, cold and familiar, washed over her. She scrambled off the bed, backing away until her back hit the cold stone of the far wall. What do you want? What I am owed, he snarled. You think you can steal a king? A destiny meant for your betters? For my Lyra? He took a step into the room. You are a tool, girl, and now you will be used. He nodded to the Covenant warriors. They moved with blinding speed. She barely had time to scream before they seized her. One grabbed her arms, twisting them painfully behind her back. The other clamped a hand over her mouth. A searing, unnatural cold shot through her as his skin touched hers. Then she saw what he held in his other hand. A cuff of dark, blackened silver, etched with jagged, angry runes, as he snapped it around her wrist, over the soul bond mark. A pain unlike anything she had ever known ripped through her. It was not physical pain. It was the pain of severance. The warm, thrumming connection to Cale was brutally, violently severed. The mark on her hand went ice cold, then numb, the silver light extinguished. The ache in her chest became a gaping, bleeding wound. She felt a part of her soul being torn out. A strangled cry escaped her lips, and then the world went black. Far away, in a snow-blasted mountain pass, Cale roared. The pain hit him like a physical blow, buckling his knees. He fell to the ground, clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The bond. Their bond. It was gone. Not faded, not distant. It was severed. An empty, agonizing void where her light had been. Alara. His royal guard gathered around him, their faces etched with alarm as their Alpha King, the unshakable mountain of their world, cried out in pure agony. He looked up, his eyes no longer molten gold but blazing silver, the color of his rage. Valerius, he snarled. He could feel it, the greasy taint of the Blackwood Alpha, and something else, something darker. The stench of the Ember Covenant. He was on his feet in an instant, his body already shifting, bones cracking and reforming. His human form melted away, replaced by the massive, midnight black wolf. She is gone, he projected to his guard, the thought a blade of pure fury. They have taken her. We hunt. Alara awoke to darkness and the damp chill of a dungeon. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and despair. She was chained to the wall, the blackened silver cuff on her wrist a circle of deadening cold. The bond mark beneath it was inert, a simple tattoo of faded gray. The void where Kale had been was a constant, soul-crushing agony. She was alone again, truly alone. The hope that had begun to bloom in her heart had been ripped out by the roots. It had all been a lie, a fleeting dream. She was back where she belonged, in the dark, in chains, worthless. The cell door scraped open, spilling sickly torchlight into the gloom. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall and slender, dressed in robes of black and crimson. He moved with a liquid grace that was unnervingly beautiful. "The soul of the North," he said, his voice a cultured, melodious tenor that did nothing to hide the venom beneath. "I must admit, I am disappointed. I expected more." This was not Valerius. This was someone far more dangerous. She could feel the wrongness of him, a cold ambition that seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. This was Morven. He glided into the cell, his red glowing eyes scanning her with cold appraisal. "Do you know what you are?" he asked, circling her like a shark. "You are a key, a conduit. The Alpha King draws his strength, the strength of all his line, from the life force of this land. A power they call the heart of the mountain. But that connection is anchored by his soul bond. By you." He stopped in front of her, tilting his head. "That bond is a flaw, a weakness. With you as the focal point and with the proper ritual, I can do more than just sever his connection. I can hijack it. I can pull the heart of the mountain into myself, all his power, all his authority. It will be mine." Tears streamed down Alara's face. She was just a weapon to be used against Kale, a tool to destroy the one person who had ever shown her kindness, who had ever looked at her and seen someone of worth. "He will come for me," she whispered, the words a desperate prayer. Morven smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression. "Oh, I am counting on it. His rage will make him predictable. He will come for you, and he will walk directly into my trap. By the time the twin moons are at their zenith tomorrow night, your precious king will be a powerless husk, and I will be the supreme alpha." He turned to leave. "Rest now, little key. You have a very important role to play in the dawn of my new age." The door slammed shut, plunging her back into darkness. Despair, absolute and suffocating, crushed her. Kale was coming. He was coming to rescue her, and he was walking into a trap that would destroy him. And it was all her fault. If she had never existed, he would be safe. Her worthlessness wasn't just a burden to a pack. It was a weapon that would bring down a king. She slumped against the wall, the chains rattling. The cold from the silver cuff seeped into her bones. She closed her eyes, wishing for the end. Wishing for the snowstorm to have claimed her. Wishing she had never been born. The agony in her soul was a bottomless pit. She let herself fall into it, giving up. And in the deepest, darkest part of that void, she felt a flicker. It was impossibly faint, a single, tiny ember in a universe of ash. It was him. It was the bond. The silver cuff had suppressed it, hidden it, but it had not been able to destroy it completely. It was a connection of souls, and it was older and deeper than any metal or dark magic. She focused on it. She poured all of her will, all of her desperation, all of her burgeoning, terrified love for him into that tiny spark. Kale. The name was a silent scream in her mind. Kale, it's a trap. And across the miles, through the pain and the rage, he heard her. It was not a voice, not a word. It was a feeling. Her terror, her despair, and a warning. Hold on, he projected back, his own will a battering ram against the darkness separating them. I am coming. The connection was severed again, the effort too much. But it was enough. He knew, and she knew he was still fighting. A new feeling ignited within her, pushing back the despair. It was not hope, it was rage. A cold, burning fury at Morven, at Valerius, at Lyra, at everyone who had ever called her nothing. They were wrong. She was not nothing. She was Kale's mate. She was the other half of his soul, and they would not use her to destroy him. The ritual chamber was a vast, circular cavern deep beneath Valerius's stronghold. The twin moons, one silver, one pale blue, shone down through a great crystal lens in the ceiling, their light converging on a rune-etched dais in the center of the room. Alara was chained to an altar on that dais, the silver cuff on her wrist now connected by conduits of the same dark metal to the runes on the floor. Morven stood before her, chanting in a guttural, ancient language. Valerius and Lyra stood by the entrance, their faces alight with greedy anticipation. She could feel her energy being pulled from her, a slow, sickening drain. It flowed through the cuff, through the conduits, feeding the spell. The runes on the floor began to glow with a sickly purple light. The air grew heavy, crackling with stolen power. Morven's voice rose to a crescendo. Come, Alpha King. Come for your soul. Your power is mine. As if in answer, the entire fortress shuddered. A roar, not of a man or a wolf, but of a force of nature, echoed from above. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. It was Kale. A moment later, the ceiling of the cavern exploded inward. Rock and dust rained down as a colossal, midnight black wolf landed on the floor, shaking the very foundations of the chamber. Kale was not alone. Behind him, dropping from the hole in the ceiling, came his royal guard, a dozen of the largest, most powerful wolves she had ever seen. They shifted to their warrior forms midair, landing as a wall of snarling muscle and drawn blades. Battle erupted. The royal guard crashed into the Ember Covenant warriors, and the cavern filled with the clang of steel and the snarls of fighting wolves. Kale had eyes only for Morven, and for her. His golden gaze met hers across the chaos, and in them she saw a rage so profound it was terrifying, and a love so deep it was heartbreaking. He lunged for the dais, a black-furred engine of destruction. Morven laughed, raising a hand. The purple energy from the runes flared, forming a shimmering barrier around the altar. Chaol slammed into it and was thrown back with a howl of pain. "Fool!" Morven cried, his voice triumphant. "The ritual is already underway. The heart of the mountain is being drawn to me. You are already weakened." It was true. Alara could feel Chaol's strength faltering through the dregs of their bond. Her life force was being used to poison him, to drain him. "Chaol, no!" she screamed, struggling against her chains. He came at the barrier again, clawing, biting, throwing his immense weight against it, but it held. Morven gestured, and tendrils of purple shadow energy lashed out, striking Chaol, making him stagger. He was losing. He was going to die. Because of her. Something inside Alara snapped. The years of abuse, the humiliation, the cold, the hunger, the despair, the terror, and the fierce, bright, burning love she felt for the king who had seen her when no one else had. It all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pure, incandescent rage. They would not have him. She screamed, a sound of pure, primal fury that was not human, and the world went white. It was not a light from the moons. It was a light from within her, an explosion of pure, untamed power that erupted from her core. It was the light of a newborn star, the fire of creation itself. It shattered the black-silver cuff on her wrist as if it were glass. It vaporized the chains. It annihilated the runes on the floor in a flash of golden fire. The wave of energy blasted outward. It didn't harm Chaol or his guard. It washed over them like a warm, healing tide. But it slammed into Morven and his covenant warriors like a physical blow. They screamed as the pure, life-giving energy seared their shadow-tainted forms. Morven was thrown from the dais, his robes smoldering. Alara stood, untethered, in the center of the devastation. She was no longer a trembling, frightened girl. Light, pure and golden, coiled around her arms. Her eyes, once a timid brown, now blazed with the same molten gold as Chaol's. The mark on her hand was a star, so bright it was painful to look at. The dormant power within her, the wolf she never had, was not a wolf at all. It was something older, something more fundamental, the power of a creator, the light of a soul. Morven staggered to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What are you?" he shrieked. "You were nothing, a worthless Omega." Alara looked at him, her gaze cold and absolute. Her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. It rang with the authority of a goddess. "I was never nothing," she declared. She raised her hand, and the light gathered, forming a spear of solid gold radiance in her grasp. Chaol watched, his wolfish form frozen in place, his golden eyes wide with utter, reverent awe. "You tried to steal his heart," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You tried to use me to bring darkness." She took a step forward, the stone cracking under her feet. "There is no place for your shadows in my world." She threw the spear of light. It crossed the cavern in a silent, brilliant arc and struck Morven square in the chest. He didn't even have time to scream. The light consumed him. It did not burn him. it unmade him. It turned his ambition, his hatred, his shadow magic into nothing but motes of dust and a fading, foul-smelling smoke. He was simply gone. With their master erased from existence, the remaining Covenant warriors broke, trying to flee, but the royal guard cut them down without mercy. Valerius and Lyra, who had been watching in horror from the entrance, turned to run, but Chaol was there. He moved like a blur of black fur, blocking their escape. He shifted, rising to his full, towering human height, his golden eyes blazing with cold fire. Lyra fell to her knees, sobbing. "Mercy, my king! We were forced! Morven!" Chaol's gaze was like chips of ice. "There is no mercy for those who harmed my queen." His voice was quiet, and it was the most terrifying sound Alara had ever heard. He raised a hand, and the shadows in the corners of the cavern seemed to leap to his command, enveloping the screaming father and daughter. Their cries were abruptly cut off. Silence fell. The battle was over. Alara stood in the center of the ruined chamber, the golden light around her slowly fading. The immense power receded, leaving her trembling, her legs threatening to give out. Chaol was moving. He crossed the cavern in 3 long strides and was before her. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and cupped her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, his touch achingly gentle. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with a universe of emotions. Awe, relief, adoration, love. "My queen," he whispered. It was not a title anymore. It was a recognition, a statement of fact. He saw not the girl she had been, but the powerhouse she had become. Tears filled her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She leaned into his touch, a sob of relief and exhaustion escaping her. He was safe. He was here. He was real. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, the scent of home. His heart hammered against her ear, a steady, life-affirming rhythm. "I have you," he murmured into her hair. "I have you." She looked down at her hand, where the bond mark blazed with a steady silver-gold light. It was a beacon of warmth and life. The ache in her soul completely gone, filled now with his presence, his love. She was no longer just a recipient of this bond. She was an equal partner in it. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look up into his impossibly beautiful face. She raised her marked hand and placed it flat against his chest, directly over his heart. "Mine," she whispered, the word full of a power and a certainty she had never known she possessed. She claimed him, just as he had claimed her. A gasp shuddered through him. A soft, ethereal light bloomed beneath her palm, and through the fabric of his tunic, she saw a matching mark of silver and gold light burn itself into his skin, a mirror image of her own. The bond settled, clicking into place, whole and complete and unbreakable. It was no longer a one-way current. It was a perfect, harmonious circuit of power and love, flowing endlessly between them. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a gentle press of lips. It was a claiming, a declaration, a sealing of their souls. It was fire and ice, shadow and light, the roar of a king and the power of a creator, all colliding. It was everything she had ever been denied: love, worth, belonging, passion, given to her in a single, soul-shattering moment. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his golden eyes glowing with a love so profound it humbled her. "Let's go home," he said softly. Days later, she stood on the great balcony of the Citadel of the North, overlooking a sea of his people. Thousands of warriors, of pack members, of families were gathered in the vast courtyard below. Cale stood beside her, his hand holding hers, their intertwined fingers a tangible symbol of their union. He had told them everything, of her origins as a cast-out Omega, of the cruelty she had faced, of her capture, and of the incredible power that had laid a Shadow King low and saved their Alpha King. He presented her not as his rescued mate, but as their savior, their queen. She wore a simple gown of deep blue that matched the color of the twilight sky over the mountains. Her hair, no longer mousy but streaked with faint threads of gold, was unbound, flowing freely in the cold, clean air. She felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, but for the first time in her life, she felt no fear, no need to shrink away. Cale raised their joined hands. "I give you Alara, the soul of the North, my mate, your queen." A roar of approval went up from the crowd, a sound that shook the very stones of the mountain. And then, as one, the entire assembly, the hardened warriors, the proud alphas, the families, dropped to one knee. It was not just fealty to their king's choice, it was reverence for her. Alara looked out at the kneeling masses, at the respect and awe on their faces. She looked at Cale, at the boundless love in his golden eyes. The last vestiges of the worthless, invisible girl she had been crumbled away, turned to dust by the sheer, undeniable reality of this moment. She was not a ghost. She was not a shadow. She was not nothing. She was Alara. She was a queen. She was loved. And she was, finally, home.